let us start. Hello, dear colleagues. Let us start with our press conference, and thank you everyone for coming and for your interest to what is going on now in our country, in Ukraine. Quite often, for the last weeks, we've heard that a lot of the world is tired from the news from Ukraine, and that the people in the world prefer not to know what is going on in our country in details. But your presence here and your interest for this press conference demonstrates that that is not true. That is not true. And it is crucial, important for everyone in Ukraine that you pay attention and you keep informing your audience about what is going on in our country, about grave violations of human rights and about war crimes that is committing just now in our country. Because when we are talking here, someone in Ukraine can be kidnapped, someone can be tortured, someone even can be killed. So thank you once again for your interest, and today we are going to talk about the enforced disappearances. Sorry, sorry for these technical problems. I hope you hear me quite well. So today we are going to talk about enforced disappearances. This press conference is dedicated to this grave violation of human rights, which is going on the occupied territories due to Russian aggression in Ukraine. We hold it in the framework of a big conference called War Aftermath, reconsidering the future of the civil society, which take place these days in Warsaw. Maybe let me start with the introducing of our today's speakers. First, let me introduce my colleague, well-known human rights defender in Ukraine, Tetiana Pechonchyk. She is the head of ZMINA Human Rights Center. Also my colleague, Tetiana Katrychenko. She is a coordinator of the Media Initiative for Human Rights and also is a journalist who investigates human rights violations. And very important that today these two ladies are with us. I mean Anastasiia Novytska. She's a stepdaughter of Serhii Tsyhipa, activist and journalist who was kidnapped in Nova Kakhovka, Kherson region. He was very active to inform the world about what is going on in the occupied region, in his own region. Oh, for now you hear me, I think. So Serhii Tsyhipa was kidnapped on March 12th, and from this time we didn't hear about him till a week ago, I think. I think Anastasiia will tell you more about it. And let me also introduce Nataliia Melnychenko. She is a sister of another activist and volunteer, Yevhen Hurianov. He is from Bucha, the small town near Kiev. I'm sure you've heard about. Yevhen helped civilians. He helped them evacuate from Bucha. He helped them with food and water and so on. And I'm very thankful that these two ladies are today with us, that they agreed to come here and to share with the stories of their relatives, because it is not, easy for them to talk today, and they are not public persons, but now they have to talk with you, to talk about what is happening with their relatives. I'd like to emphasize that not everyone from our speakers actually speak English, so we have translation for this broadcasting, and you may switch into English or into Ukrainian, so to understand better what is going on here. Both of our my name is Olga Reshetylova. I'm also the coordinator of the Media Initiative for Human Rights, and both of our organizations, ZMINA Human Rights Center and Media Initiative for Human Rights, document the cases of enforced disappearance together with another organization, Crimean Human Rights Group. They are not present here today, but they are with us, and together with them we prepared such a report about enforced disappearances in Ukraine. It is unfortunately only in Ukrainian because we had not enough time to translate it, but I think Tanya will tell you more about it in English. So I give the floor to my colleague Tetiana Pechonchyk, and they will tell you about what is going on with activists and active people in the occupied territories of Ukraine.
Thank you, Olga. I would like to start my presentation from the words of gratitude to Poland and to all Polish people for the support that provided to Ukrainians in these atrocities and very difficult times for our country, and for journalists and the work that you do. For work that you do to cover all what is happening in Ukraine. Our organization is documenting enforced disappearances in the territories which are newly occupied by Russia. And we see this is not a new practice which is committed by the Russian army, by other agents involved in it. Actually, we saw the same practice 8 years ago when Russia occupied Crimea, and my organization, Human Rights Center ZMINA, started its documentation work on the ground in Crimea, and have been working there 8 years of occupation, including even now, when we still have activists and colleagues in Crimea who continue to document. And coming back to the March of 2014, we have a wave of enforced disappearances of local Crimean activists, journalists. The biggest number of people were abducted in March, and then this practice followed in 14, 16, 2017 with some single cases. Majority of the abducted people were Crimean Tatars. And one of them was found tortured till death. It is Reshat Ametov. Some people were released, and some people are still missing. And it's 8 years already. We are afraid that they are not alive anymore. Also, this practice continued in Donbass, in the so-called DPR, LPR, these so-called People's Republics. I think that you heard about the famous prison Izolyatia, when many people were kept, tortured, with the bigger numbers of those people who went through all these nightmares. And now we see it's a new wave, much bigger, happening. Every new wave is bigger, happening across those newly occupied territories by the Russian Federation. We fixed these cases in 8 regions of Ukraine, 8 oblasts. It's Kiev, Chernihiv, Sumy Oblast, Kharkiv region, Luhansk region, Donetsk region, Kherson region, Zaporizhia region. And these cases are described in our report. I have to say that it's very difficult to assess the general number of abducted people due to limitation of the work on the occupied territories and threats in informing and problems with connection. And I assess it can be hundreds and thousands of cases, and they are directed against, the main groups who are most vulnerable to this practice of abductions and enforced disappearances are several groups. First is those whom we call the active members of local communities, who are most visible at the local level, including representatives of local self-government bodies, village heads, city mayors, activists, volunteers, journalists, human rights defenders. The second group are military and ex-military representatives of law enforcement, their families, and also just average people, local businessmen and other people. So colleagues will tell more about it, and we, in this report, we focused our attention on this group of active members of local communities. And also we collected this data from several sources, including open sources, media, and information published by the local self-government bodies, also from the relatives, from the colleagues of those taken and people and kidnapped, and also from our own sources of people, activists who still are staying on that territories. And it's very difficult, as it was told, with numbers. It's very difficult to work with numbers because from one side we have only those data that our organizations were able to collect and verify, and from the other side the numbers are changing every day. In this report, as of 20th of April, we have 139 cases that were documented. Now my colleague working with our databases informed it's already 163 cases. And so the situation is changing very quickly. We receive information about new abductions every day, and every day there are also information about some releases of people taken on the occupied territory. So, for example, one person which is listed missing in our list, Serhii Tsyhipa, was several days ago. There was a news that he was released. So it's very, quickly changing situation. But I will give you the assessment and general scope of the problem as we fixed it a week ago and analyzed and prepare this report and statistic of all these atrocities happening to people. So when we look at the numbers, we can see that, as I said, these are general number of the cases. Out of them, 65 people are still detained or missing, and we speak not only about people who are missing due to shelling, but in those cases where we have grounds to believe they were kidnapped, they were taken physically by the Russian agents. 67 people were released, and 7 people were found murdered or were released and later died from the torture they experienced in captivity. The biggest number of the cases was fixed at the territory of Kherson region and Zaporizhia region, and then followed by Donetsk region, Kiev region, Kharkiv region, Chernihiv region, and others. And majority of those abducted people were men. 114 cases they were men, and 23 cases women. And when it comes to the activity of those people, who they were, the majority of them were representatives of local self-government bodies, like I mentioned, city mayors, village heads, starostas. It's 62 persons. 43 out of them were also out of abducted people were activists and volunteers. 12 were journalists, editors, or owners of media, and then 6 of them were school teachers, school directors who publicly opposed the Russian occupation authorities and refused to introduce a Russian programs in these occupied areas in the schools. And then there were religious leaders who were also representatives of different churches, who were also actively helping this occupied community, and also representatives of culture, lawyers, politicians, local politicians, and 5 cases when the relatives of those active persons were targeted to put pressure on these people. And when it comes to the time, we see the tendency that people have more chances to be released quickly just within a few days, and if they are not released, there is a tendency that they would be kept for a long time. For example, 25 persons of this list are kept more than 30 days. And when you ask why it's happening, why do they target and kidnap all these people, I think there are 2 reasons that they are following. The first reason is to break the resilience of people in these newly occupied areas. We see that there is a big resistance of the local populations to the invaders, and there are a lot of pro-Ukrainian meetings, demonstrations with Ukrainian flags, which are happening in those occupied cities, which are dispersed, and occupational authorities shoot at the demonstrators, and we have some people that disappeared after these peaceful demonstrations. And the nation is very united against Russian invasion. Even we have enlisted those like representatives and city mayors from the oppositional Bloc for Life. It's considered pro-Russian party, but even they refuse to cooperate with Russians. So in order to terrify local population and stop this resilience, occupational authorities deliberately choose the most active and visible members of local communities, kidnap, torture them to show a signal to others that they have to stop this resilience. The second, especially when it comes to the representatives of local self-government bodies, it's to push them for collaboration, for cooperation with these occupational authorities, and to set up the rules and orders of Russian Federation in these newly occupied areas. And this is not only about them, but also when, for example, the relatives are taken into account, is also to put pressure on activists. For example, the relatives of one of local journalists where the father was kidnapped in order to give the access to the admin panel of the local website to the occupational authorities. And so what can be done to help these people and to release them? Actually, it's not many what can be done, because these Russian authorities, they do not respect any orders, any rules, and they took these people as hostages, basically, in many cases. But we do believe that in those cases where the cases are public and relatives also agree, spreading of this information, it's very important to raise awareness about specific cases and to cover them in media, to send the Russians and Kremlin clear signal that international community and media in many countries are following the destinies of these people, and we believe it would help, if not to release, but at least to decrease the level of torture of these people. And also it's important, of course, to launch investigations to appeal to different international organizations. For example, one of the organizations working with us, it's OMCT, it's a World Organization Against Torture, submits the appeals to the UN Working Group on Enforced Disappearances, and then UN Working Groups contacts Russian government with asking them where these people are. But we see that, yesterday UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres was in Kiev and Russians bombed Kiev and he was there. So really we have very little hopes that any legal mechanisms can work. But still we are very grateful for your attention to this topic, and we ask you to raise and cover these stories in your respective media. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya, for your detailed report. And Of course, we are here to ask you for your support and to spread at least the names of those people who are kept by Russians. And the part of name of our press conference is how the occupiers are breaking the resistance of Ukraine. So the kidnapping and abducted abductions are the method of the war for Russians. But not only active people are abducted by them. Near with them are ordinary citizens, and they are taken hostages. Media Initiative for Human Rights conducted a big investigation, journalistic investigation about what happening to those people who were taken hostages in Kiev region, and what happened to them when this region was released, and those people just disappeared and nobody knew where they were. So I want to give a floor to my colleague Tetiana Katrychenko, and she will tell you more about the investigation of the Media Initiative for Human Rights and what happened to those people.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Olga. Excuse me for my English, please, but I try. Russians detained not only activists who opposed the occupation, but also ordinary citizens, especially men. The journalist Dmytro Chylyuk was detained in the village of Kozarovichy, Kiev region, on March 3rd. The Russians came to his house. They didn't know that Dmytro was a journalist. They checked his phone. Some information in Dmytro's phone was suspicious. Dmytro and his 70-year-old father were detained. In a few days, his father was released, but no Dmytro. He was in Dimir, close to Kozarovichy village. After the Russian army left Kozarovichy, people haven't been found so far. There is evidence that some of them may be detained in Russia, in Bryansk region. We found a man who had moved from Dimir to the Bryansk region. His name Volodymyr. He is a volunteer. Volodymyr said 40 men were deported with me. We were taken by 2 trucks. A total of 37 people were brought to Belarus. There were several servicemen, but majority the civilians. Then they were transported to Belarus and Bryansk region to the village. It's called Novozypkov in the pre-trial detention center number 2. The man witnessed that when people were just brought to this center, they were beaten. I heard 72 names, but there were up to 200 people, maybe more, says Volodymyr. There are many beaten during interrogation. Some of them were tortured with electric shocks. People were given prison clothes. The Russians took fingerprints and blood samples for the test from all. Ukrainians have not received any court decisions of or explanation regarding reasons why they were detained and deported to Russia. They just stole us like object, took us to another country. There was nothing even close to lawful about it, says Volodymyr. He confirmed that Dmytro Chylyuk is also being held in Bryansk region. Volodymyr was released on April. Novozypkov in Bryansk region isn't the one place where Ukrainian citizens are being held in Russia. While Volodymyr was being taken to the prisoner exchange location, the hostages from other places of detention were added to the group along the way. There are some places of detention in the Russian regions, maybe Kursk, Belgorod, and Rostov, and regions with it. So we can talk about war crimes. The first is the relocation of civilians from the occupied territories. The second is keeping them in captivity. And this practice is not new for Russia. Russia has seized new territories, but acts there in the old way, killing, kidnapping, and tortured Ukrainians. We know about 3,000 cases in the occupied Donetsk and Lugansk regions from 2014-2022. Until February 24th, 300 citizens were in prison in the occupied territory of Donetsk and Lugansk region. There are doctors, drivers, and teachers. Most of them were called Ukraine spies by the occupation administration. Some of them have been in prison for 5 years. Russia didn't agree to release them. Russia has used and continues to use civilians not only as a human shield for the criminal activities, but also as a means of pressure of the Ukrainian government. Now our organization is trying to gather information about hostages and in prisons of war. There are already more than 800 names in our list, but in fact more than 7,000 people have been detained from February 24. Thank you.
Thank you, Tetiana. And as my colleague said, there is no mechanism for now how to release all those people, and even I think nobody knows the exact number of detained people deported to Russia by forcibly. So now I want to give a floor to a stepdaughter of Serhii Tsyhipa. He is a famous activist and blogger from Novakakhovka, as I already mentioned. Nastya will speak in Ukrainian. Тому, Настя, я прошу розказати про вашого батька.
So please tell about your father, when kidnapping happened, and what do you know at the moment?
Thank you. As you know already, my stepfather was abducted illegally, and he's being kept illegally in Russian captivity. That was on the 12th of March, around 10 a.m. And he went to work as a volunteer in the next town. Tavrisk was the name of the town. And he and my mother were volunteering right from the start of the war and of the occupation, because Serhii has many friends and many connections, and many people from abroad wanted to help. So they were raising funds and they were helping people in Novakakhovka. So on the 12th of March, he went again to work as a volunteer to one of an elderly ladies in Tavrisk. And we need to understand that each time when he and my mom were going to deliver help somewhere, so each time they were subjecting themselves to danger, because every single time they were crossing the Russian crossing points which were established there. And Serhii had a mobile phone with him, and I believe that that mobile phone contained a lot of provocative material, because he was an activist, he was a journalist, and he is a great patriot. And I believe that this is exactly why he was abducted. His phone was the reason. So at crossing points, Russians check mobile phones, and I am not really sure if this was exactly what provoked a Russian military man. But how did we understand that he was abducted? He left home around 10 a.m. and he was supposed to come back at around 1 because this distance is not really great. And my mother got a phone call around noon, and then she said that she felt that something was happening. And then I just said, well, she should really calm down, and maybe, there could have been anything happening. Maybe he stayed longer with the elderly lady. Maybe he had a chat, or maybe he may have lost his mobile phone, or something else may have happened. But when she called me again at 4, and then he said that Sergei was no longer, still not there. So I understood that something must have happened. But I asked my mom to stay home until the morning because walking at night was very dangerous. So on the next morning, my mom went to follow his footsteps along the itinerary that he was supposed to cover. But this didn't bring any result, regretfully. So he actually did not make it to the place where he was heading on the previous day. On the same day, and this is very important piece of information, another journalist was disappeared. He was Sergei's colleague, Oleg Baturin. And now Olha is back home. And how did we find out that Serhii was detained? My mom approached a number of instances in Novytska. These were Russian military men. These were various kinds of officials, and she was walking around and asking if they knew anybody like this and if they had any information about him. So right from the start, the authorities didn't provide any information at all, and they just said, well, we didn't know anything, so they didn't know him and that they hadn't seen him. And then they couldn't confirm information that Sergei was in captivity. And 10 days later, Oleg Baturin, the journalist, returned home. And my mom got a phone call from Oleg's sister saying, and she found out that Oleg was back home and that she knew that Oleg was together with Sergei. And over time, he found my mom and told my mom that when they were riding on a car, they had sacks on their heads. And then he heard the surname of my stepfather when they were calling everyone present. So this was for him a message, a piece of information to understand that Serhii was also in captivity. They were not given any food, and he was tortured, and he was blackmailed, he was threatened. His family was also threatened. There were threats against his family, and that's why I believe that Sergei was subjected to the same type of treatment. And as days passed, there was no news. We couldn't even have any possibility to somehow communicate with my stepfather. And then my mother went to the executive committee, local executive committee, and now there is a Russian official named Leontiev, and my mom approached him asking about my stepfather, and this Russian official said, "Well, don't you worry, woman. Serhii is in our captivity. He is not being tortured, but he's very inconvenient, and that's why we're keeping him there." So when there were some questions that she asked about possibility to communicate or maybe to pass on some items to him, they refused. And then they just said, that my mom should leave the room. And then around later after he's disappeared, and then he disappeared, by the way, together with his dog. The dog was found at the door of the same executive committee, and that's quite a curious fact why the dog was found there. And there were some questions that my mom asked to the Russian military about the dog, and then the Russians said that, oh, they had found the dog in the field and they didn't know Serhii Tsyhipa. And that was before my mom talked to Mr. Leontiev. And then about 5 days ago, on Russia 24 channel, there was an interview with my stepfather that was broadcast. And when I was watching that interview, I was really shocked because I know how he talks. I know that he's a journalist and I know how he feels in front of the camera. And that was a completely different man. He had his hair cut very short. He lost a lot of weight. He looked very bad. He had lots of bruises on his head. And then he was holding one of his arms differently, and I don't know why this happened. We can only imagine, what was happening behind the door when he was held in captivity. So during that interview, he was saying things that, cannot really come to our heads. I do understand that he said that to protect his life, and I saw that, and I was just watching him speak. He was probably under the influence of some drugs. Maybe he got something injected because that was totally emotionless. And this was so horrible. I cannot really tell you how I felt when I was watching this interview. And I understand that he was forced to say this, and then he was holding on for 2 months. 2 months. He didn't agree to accept any conditions that he was offered from the Russian military, and that's why he was not released. And that's an open question. I don't know why Serhii was not released. Me and my mother, we were communicating with a very large number of journalists, lawyers, and with a very large number of volunteers who were potentially able to help us to include Serhii in the list of people or POWs for exchange. This is our goal. At the moment, I don't really know what to do because, the further, the more time passes, the more questions we have. And the more thoughts we have, and the more hopeful we are that things would really end very soon. And I hope very much that this conference can be an eye-opener to people who are still not realizing what is happening in the territories that are being occupied. People out there have no possibility to talk, to speak. They have no regular telecommunication. They have problems accessing the internet. Now I am fighting and waging an information war because I can be in a safe place and I can speak and I can help my family. I need help. I need assistance. I want to see my stepfather alive and I want to see him intact and safe and sound. Thank you very much.
Your story, and thank you for so detailed story, and we hope that the publicity and the spreading the information about those who are kept in as a hostages will help us to release those people. Another activist and volunteer, Yevhen Hurianov, he's from Bucha. I think everyone saw what happened to citizens of Bucha, and Yevhen was brave so much that in those circumstances he helped the civilians to survive. I want to ask the sister of Yevhen, Nataliia, to share her story with us.
Good day, Sky. My name is Nataliia Melnychenko, and I am here to tell you about my brother, Yevhen Hurianov. Since March 17th, he has been in captivity. Zhenya lived and worked in Bucha. He built the house with his own hands. He worked as an auto mechanic and raised children. During the pandemic, he learned to bake. It turned out so tasty for him that we offered him a change of profession. And I want to notice that he has no any relation to Ukrainian army or any radical organizations. And then February 24, the day that changed life for people all around the world. War, Bucha, occupation of Bucha by Russian troops. I asked Zhenya to evacuate, but Zhenya said no. He said, I can't. This is my home. I'm needed here. But even while under occupation, Zhenya tried as much as possible to spread the news about himself and cheer me up, support me, a real big brother. And then I found out that on March 19th, Russian troops took him prisoner. On March 17th, Russian troops came to Zhenya's house. There were many of them, all armed against 3 people who had never held a weapon in their lives. At gunpoint, Zhenya, his wife and younger brother were taken outside and began to be interrogated, or as they themselves call it, release. On March 19, the troops of the Russian Federation Liberators appeared again, but now there were much more of them. The Liberators drove straight into the yard in the tank. Zhenya, his wife, and his younger brother were taken out of the house, and each was taken for interrogation separately. And while Zhenya was on his knees with the muzzle of a machine gun at his back, a search was carried out in his house. All Zhenya's documents were taken away, gadgets and computer were smashed. After interrogation, Zhenya was taken captivity. They took him out at gunpoint, not allowing him to straighten his back. Since then, I have not communicated with him, There is no communication with him. When people saw a post on Facebook that Zhenya was taken away by Russian troops, people started calling and writing to me. I didn't know many people. People say to me that during the evacuation of Bucha, Zhenya helped them with groceries, delivered food and water to them, and helped them evacuate. He also took a family with a small child and settled them at his home and later helped them to evacuate. This family lost their homes during the bombing in Hostomel. Zhenya helped put out the fire. The roof of the neighbor's house caught fire when a shell hit it. Then, the empty house of the neighbors were under the supervision of Zhenya, and therefore the murderers had no chance. Under bullets and explosions, Zhenya began to patronize and help neighbors and people who remained in the district. And he also takes care of the neighbors' animals which they could not take out, and guard the house from murders. Zhenya told me, I can't live. I am needed here. I have to help people. He did it at the call of his heart, according to the state of his soul. Do not let people die of hunger during the occupation. Help to evacuate in order to survive. Thanks him, some of these people really survived. But Zhenya did it simply because Zhenya could not do otherwise. He does not consider this a feat or heroism. He just can't help it. And then Zhenya was taken prisoner. And here I am to tell you about it, hoping for help, in the hope and faith that Zhenya will be returned home, returned to his family. Thank you. That's all what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Natalia, very much. And I'd like to say that our colleagues from OMST submitted a communication on alleged enforced disappearance about Yevhen Hurianov. But as Tetiana mentioned, we have no feedback from the UN committee because they have no feedback from Russia, unfortunately, from Kremlin. So as we've mentioned, there is no mechanism for now for releasing of those people, but we hope that the spreading of the information will help somehow, at least for them to not to be tortured and to have just human treatment for them. So if anyone have questions to our speakers, please, the floor is yours. And if someone of our speakers want to add something, you can also do this. So, are there any questions? Please.
We always talking about that we don't have some mechanism how to release these people, how to return these people, but maybe you have some step that international community should do in, or how they can help us to release or return these people.
Please, Tetiana, will you?
Yes, there are several ways how to help, and the first is to raise awareness about these cases that are already published. In this report, it's not all cases, because sometimes we relatives object the spread of information, and of course we do not publish such stories, because they hope that maybe sometimes spreading information can harm the process of release. But in those cases, when they are ready to talk, it's important. And in March, we launched a big international awareness-raising campaign, which is called The Taken, when the stories of some of these people were published by international media, on Twitter accounts of UK Foreign Prime Minister or Richard Branson or other famous people at the international level. And we continue to collect this data, so we are ready to share the peculiarities or more information on the cases if you need, but it's still already a lot which is available in our reports. And then a second, as I said, it's important to use international mechanisms, and even if they are helpless, like we told today about the UN working group on enforced disappearances, we still think it's important to use all existing mechanisms. And also it's very important to understand that committing these enforced disappearances and arbitrary detentions, it's a war crime, crime against humanity, and this can be prosecuted. And the reason, as I mentioned, this is not a new practice. It's happened in Donbass, in Crimea, and the reason why it's happening now, as well as why all this large-scale military aggression is happening now to Ukraine again, is impunity for all previous actions of the Russian Federation agents and Russian Federation's leadership. We know from Crimea that in many cases local paramilitary group called Crimean Self-Defense, acting together with Russian army, was involved in the kidnapping and torturing local Crimean Tatar activists, and none of them was punished for these actions. None was punished for committing these actions in later situations. That's why we also have to share this data with law enforcement, and we have informational exchange with the Ukrainian Prosecutor General, and also it's important to provide these cases for other institutions internationally that are now working on the situation in Ukraine, like International Criminal Court, the UN Commission of Inquiry, and other institutions, which of course their work would not help to release these people immediately, but it's important that investigations are also launched and conducted, and those people involved in these abductions are identified and punished through different types of national courts and international tribunals.
Thank you, Tetiana, and I'd like to emphasize that our NGOs, all these activities, our NGOs conduct in the framework of the activities of the 5 AM coalition. It is the coalition of 27 Ukrainian NGOs who come together to document all the war crimes and crimes against humanity which is going on just now in Ukraine because of Russian aggression. So if there are any other questions, you may ask. If no, I think we can finish our press conference. I think there is no more questions, yeah? Thank you to our speakers. Thank you for sharing your stories and your wonderful work, my colleagues, because it is, as we said, it is crucial for not only for Ukrainians, but for the whole world to understand and to know what is going on to Ukrainian citizens, what methods Russians use to break Ukrainian resistance. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much for being here with us. So let's keep in touch. Let's share the information between us. Let's spread the information for your audience, and let's help Ukraine to resist. Thank you very much.